Hello and welcome to another episode of Jaxon Talks, everybody. With me, your host, Jaxon Stone, and this is episode number 95 of Jaxon Talks, everybody. Wow, we're inching closer to episode 100, which I keep saying on every episode that's going to be special, but I have no idea why or how it's going to be special. It might just be me talking about the last 99 episodes of Jaxon Talks, everybody, and how much this podcast means to me, which seems very special. So that might be exactly what I do. But today I'm joined by an extremely interesting, insightful, and wise guest who I found via Twitter. I've been following him via Twitter for a long time. I'm also subscribed to his newsletter, which is also incredibly good. And I'm joined today by Dr. Corey Wilks. He is a licensed clinical psychologist, but he's recently moved into the coaching space where kind of his mission is to help founders, creators, and entrepreneurs build an intentional life using evidence-based psychology, which he is a doctor in. And so I think from following you and hearing your newsletter and looking at your course, you're really about building an intentional life. And I think that's what we're going to get into today, as well as some mental models, the intersection of sports and mental health, what the difference between coaching and therapy is, and a lot of really great topics that my audience is super interested in, I'm super interested in, and Corey is an expert in. After all that, Corey, welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be here.
Well, before we pressed record, we were both talking about some AC issues that we were having in our house. So hopefully we don't sweat too much throughout this podcast, but you might see some dribbles on my forehead throughout, but depending on how good my Zoom camera is. But anyways, I start this podcast in a very kind of specific manner. It's kind of the theme of the podcast. And I did ask you this question before we hit record, but I'm hoping for a little more expanded answer. So Corey, with everything you got going on with your transition into the entrepreneur lifestyle and just how the climate of the world is, how are you doing? Like, really, how are you doing?
So for me, man, especially recently, I've kind of been on this sort of precipice of simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, right? And that reminds me that I am growing, right? Because, your comfort zone is called your comfort zone for a reason, right? Like you're rarely challenged in your comfort zone. So a lot of people get in this trap of, well, I'm only going to do things that are easier. I'm only going to do things that I'm inherently good at. And that's fine. That's definitely one track that you can go in life. That isn't really the track that is fulfilling for me. And I'm sure we'll get into this more, but, I don't have a business background. I grew up poor as fuck, like food stamps, public housing, a lot of family members on like social security, disability type shit. So even though I went through school and got a doctorate and everything, I have sort of Frankensteined together my entrepreneurial journey since I left like a 9-to-5 job. And, things are finally kind of coming to a head as far as like with the course. And I got a couple other, irons in the fire and things to where now it's like, I am pushing every day the edges of my competency. So I've just kind of embraced this feeling of, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but I'll figure it out.
Wow. I all of the time feel exactly the same. So I think that's where excellence lies, right? Like this challenge, skills, balance, which I'm sure you know all about, right? It's like I'm stretching myself, but I'm not snapping myself. And I think that's where I am. A little bbit about me for those that are listening to this podcast because they're on your audience. I own and operate a mental health nonprofit called You Are Loved. I have a sports background, played Division I baseball, also became a professional wrestler. And now I'm a coach kind of in the same space as you and I have a podcast. And so all of these things, living this entrepreneurial life is brand new. And I think it's super important to convey to our audience that we also are still trying to figure it out all of the time. And everything that I tweet, and I think everything that you tweet or talk about is also a reminder to yourself. And I think that's very important.
Yeah. And on that topic, one of the guys I've coached before, he came to me and he was like, look, man, I've built 10 other companies and I'm trying to figure out what 11th company is worth my time to build. Right. So this dude had a great track record overall. It had a big exit, all this other stuff. And one of the things that he now is much more open about is he constantly like feels like an imposter. Right. And his 11th company he's building is essentially a like a nutrition optimization company to help humans become a spacefaring society, pretty much, of like, how can we dial in your nutrition on Earth so that, you know, if we go to Mars or we do all this whatever other shit, that's dialed in, so we have way more flexibility to kind of do more things and go more places. So this dude's doing big shit, but then every day he's like, I just feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. So like, if somebody like that still struggles, right? And I've heard, you know, about like really famous writers like Neil Gaiman, or you know, like astronauts like Buzz Aldrin, like all these people, they kind of feel the same way of like, man, everybody else in this room is on top of their shit, or everybody else I see on Twitter is on top of their shit, but I'm not. And it's like, the truth is like, nobody has it figured out at all.
Right. And there's so much common humanity in that, and there's so much beauty in that. But on that subject, you are coaching these elite people, like elite business people. What kind of tools are you giving them, or what are you saying to them to help them navigate that imposter syndrome? Even helping yourself as well.
Yeah. So it depends on kind of what they're coming to me for, but in their specific circumstances, but overall with imposter syndrome. So when I was early in grad school, because again, originally I started, you know, I did therapy. In December, we went and did like a homeless outreach event. So the schools of psychology, pharmacy, medicine, a bunch of other schools, we all got together and we went to like a parking lot of like, you know, a local church or whatever. And we did this outreach event. So people who were experiencing homelessness, they could come, they could get food, clothes, they could get a medical checkup, prescription if they needed it. And then there was me. And I'm like, these motherfuckers are fighting for their life, like literally like struggling to survive, because it is mid-December in rural Appalachia. So like sub-freezing temperatures. I was like, they don't need deep breathing exercises. Like they don't like anxiety, depression, like that's some other level shit. Like you all are fighting to survive every day. So I was like, I serve no function here. Like there's nothing that I can help with right now. And I remember going up to two of my supervisors who between them had like 50 years of experience. And I was like, hey, when does this feeling like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, go away? And they looked at me, they're like, we'll let you know. Meaning nobody feels like they have their shit fully together.
Right.
From that moment on, honestly, I no longer had imposter syndrome in like the classical sense. Because my whole thing, like from that moment on, I'm like, well, shit, nobody knows what they're doing. So it's okay if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'll figure it out. Right. So a lot of the ways that I approach coaching, one, you know, obviously I share that story, but another big thing is, one is, you know, where is this imposter syndrome or this fear of incompetence or some level of that? Where's that kind of coming from? And really kind of digging into that for the individual, right? Because so many people, so like, for example, some people inherently, so I call them the 4 horsemen of fear, right? So the 4 most common limiting beliefs that hold people back. So that is fear of failure. Everybody's familiar with that one. Fear of uncertainty, which is, I don't know which direction to go. I don't know which decision is the right decision for me. Fear of ridicule, which is, how will other people react? What will my friends and family say? And that one kind of gets into imposter syndrome, right? Like imposter syndrome is this self-sabotaging behavior that helps you avoid the thing you're afraid of. Because if you say, well, I don't think that I belong in that room, I don't think I'm good enough to be there, then you never face that fear. You never put yourself out there. You never take those chances. So imposter syndrome actually serves the function to help you avoid the very things that you're afraid of. Right. And the other fear is fear of success, And that is actually, it sounds weird because you're like, why would I be afraid to achieve the thing I say I want? But a lot of people deep down believe that they don't deserve success, right? Or they believe that if they achieve success, they'll peak, like they'll lose their ambition. They'll never do anything else, in their life. So I look at things like imposter syndrome or perfectionism or procrastination, all these kind of self-sabotaging behaviors. I look at it as this is a symptom of an underlying fear that you have, right? So instead of asking, why do I have imposter syndrome? Asking, what function does imposter syndrome serve, right? Like psychologists, we do what's called a functional analysis. Basically just means what purpose or what function does this behavior serve for you? How does it actually helping you in some twisted way, right? So I don't really look at it as how do we get rid of imposter syndrome so much as how do we understand what fear this is rooted in? How does this relate to my fear? How does this helping me avoid the things that I'm afraid to do? Right. That, in my experience, leads to a much more productive session or much deeper insight rather than saying, oh, hey, man, it's okay. Nobody knows what they're doing. Like that's some intellectual shit that doesn't really sink in emotionally versus really trying to explore and get super introspective of what the fuck are you afraid of? And why is that fear causing this imposter syndrome, right? Like, is it because deep down you believe that you don't belong in the room because you believe you're not good enough? Is it, by putting yourself out there, people, you think people are going to realize that you're a dumbass, in air quotes, right? Because you're not a dumbass. Like, what are you afraid of deep down? You're not afraid of being an imposter. You are afraid of something else that thinking you're an imposter is actually helping you avoid the thing you're deeply afraid of. So that's kind of some of the shit that I do, man, is like trying to get super deep on what is at the core of everything you're trying to do and everything that's kind of standing in your way. And how can we learn to understand that and then develop strategies to overcome it, to either remove those obstacles or overcome them in some other way.
Yeah. Because then once you figure out that underlying fear, then are you having people face that fear in like a safe way, like voluntarily, or then where are you going next to after you discover that underlying fear?
Yeah. So one thing, so at the end of the day, we fear the unknown. Okay. Like everything you've ever been afraid of, ultimately, it is the things that you do not know that actually terrify you. So it isn't that you're afraid you will fail, because if you know you'll fail definitively, there's nothing to be afraid of because like you fucking know. You are afraid that you will fail. Like, well, what if I do? Right? Or you're afraid that people will ridicule you. Right? What will they say? What will happen? What, XYZ, what, you just catastrophizing. So if the core problem is we fear the unknown, then the solution inherent in that is we make the unknown known. And I know that sounds like some real super deep shit. It isn't as deep as it sounds, like some fortune cookie shit. But right, like I was like, oh, Corey's so fucking profound. Like, no, it's just, it is what it is. So one thing we do is what I call fear inoculation. Right. So just like how like a vaccine works, and I'm not that kind of doctor, but my super like third grade understanding is vaccines work by introducing a little bit of the bad thing into your system so that your system can deal with it. And then if it ever comes around again, your system is better prepared to handle the real deal. Right. So fear inoculation, sometimes from like stoicism, or if people are familiar with like Tim Ferriss, I know he does like a fear setting type exercise. It's similar. So fear inoculation is essentially, okay, let's define the thing you're afraid of. What is the worst case scenario, this catastrophe that you keep worrying about? Let's assume it happens. Let's assume that shit hits the fan. With that assumption, what now? How are you going to do damage control? How are you going to recover from it? How will you deal with this, assuming it actually comes to reality? It actually happens. And what you find when you go through this thought experiment is you really break it down like, okay, specifically, what the fuck are you afraid of happening? Oh, I'm afraid of X, Y, Z, whatever. Cool. If those things happen, how will you deal with them? Right. So like if you're afraid of failure, let's assume you fail. What then? Do you go back to the drawing board with all this knowledge you otherwise wouldn't have had? Right. Because if you're afraid of failure, so you just don't do it at all, well, you gain nothing. If you at least try and then fail, well, now you come back with way more knowledge and understanding and experience than you would have otherwise. Right. How will you see it as more of an iterative process of it isn't this before and after of either I succeed or I don't. It is, okay, I learned all of this stuff. So now what is version 2 going to look like? How can I come back at it? How can I pivot my business? How can I, I mean, like, so you wrestle, right? So like I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? So,
me too. I love
okay.
jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I'm a purple belt. Yeah. Wrestlers fuck me up on a daily basis, right?
Not a purple belt.
I've been doing it about 9 years, right?
Okay. That's awesome.
So, okay. Yeah. So wrestling, jiu-jitsu, like any sort of martial art that is like you actually touch each other in combat, not just fucking katas or some shit, like actually like combat sports, it's all iterative, right? It isn't that you succeeded or you failed. Is it you learned what the fuck works and what the fuck doesn't work. So then you go back and you say, okay, I kept getting caught here. This guy kept submitting me here. I kept getting pinned when I did X, Y, or Z. Cool. What did you learn? How can you apply that to the next match or to your next training session? How can you get better by seeing everything that happens as information, as feedback? Okay. So when you break down like that fear of failure into, oh, well, if I failed, I would learn to see it as an opportunity to take what has happened to me and then apply that to the next thing that I do. Right. Especially in entrepreneurship, because whether your first business succeeds or fails or whatever is irrelevant in that you will learn so much from either way, either thing happening, that your second company, your second endeavor will be more successful because you can take everything you learned, good and bad, from that first experience. Right. So that's a big thing that we do is we break it all down. One guy, his big fear was fear of success. And he was like, look, man, I've been the underdog my entire life. What does the dog do if it catches the car? He was like, what if I lose all of my ambition? What if I achieve like, this niche fame and I gain too much authority in the way of people hang on my every word and they put too much faith in my opinions. He's like, I'm just a dude. I the whole power corrupts, mentality of like, I'm afraid that if I achieved that level of authority and celebrity, that would change me. So then it was like, okay, let's break it down. Let's list out all the shit. Let's assume all the shit happens. You get super famous in your niche and then What then? How are you going to deal with it? Oh, well, I would have these checks and balances in place. I would do this. I would do that. Like, and we broke it down. Right. So as soon as you make the unknown known or knowable, it's no longer terrifying because now you made it concrete. Now you know exactly what you're afraid of and you know exactly how you're going to deal with it. So then it isn't that the fear fully goes away so much as you're like, okay, I know what I'll do if this happens. And because you now feel prepared, now it is way easier for you to move forward with whatever this goal is. Because that's the thing is like most people avoid the shit that they're afraid of. Right.
Right.
So here's the thing. Fear and danger are two separate things. The issue is when we assume fear means danger. Right. So like, if I pointed a gun at your head, that would induce fear. But if it was a Nerf gun, you wouldn't be in danger, but you would still experience all of this fear because you don't know it's a Nerf gun. You think it's a real fucking gun. Right. Conversely, I could point a real fucking gun at the back of your head. And if you don't know about it, you have no fear, although you're in hella danger. Right. So that's another question you can ask yourself is, okay, I'm afraid, but am I in danger? We in modern society are very rarely in actual danger, but we're afraid of shit all the time. We're afraid of, a bill running late. We're afraid of how our family's going to react when we tell them we're taking this career path versus that. We're afraid of how the fuck Twitter's going to react or some shit, like, right? Like, we're afraid of deadlines. We're afraid of what our boss is going to say. We're afraid of going to this job interview, right? We're afraid to meet our girlfriend's dad or whatever it is, right? We're afraid of tons of shit that never actually puts us in real danger. So learning to see it that way, be like, oh fuck, I'm not actually in danger. Like, this isn't on a the grand scheme of things, this isn't a huge deal. The issue a lot of people run into is they assume that because they're afraid, that means they're in danger. And then they kick into this fight or flight mode, and they just kind of get paralyzed with shit. That's where the problems kind of come out.
Yeah. So you want to try and decouple the two of those things.
Yeah.
And do you think that when people start working through their fears, that they completely are able to remove that fear, or they just become better at moving forward despite having that still, or being able to better manage it?
I think it's about tempering it, right? And keeping it into perspective. A big issue with a lot of fear is fear makes us myopic, meaning it makes us short-sighted, to where all we can see is this thing that we are immediately afraid of. So learning to take take a step back and see it from a larger perspective helps put it in its place mentally, right? Of like, hey, I have this big investor pitch, or hey, I have this job interview, whatever it is. Yeah, that's a big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, even if this one thing doesn't work out, there's tomorrow, there's next week, there's next month, there's also the shit, right? One question I ask, people is, whatever the thing is you're currently afraid of, just ask yourself, will this matter in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, and in 10 years? 99% of things will never make it to that 10-year mark of like, oh, well, this will matter tomorrow, but it won't matter next week. Well, if it won't matter next week, it doesn't fucking matter now. Overall, as far as dedicating hours and hours worth of worrying and trying to figure it out, right? And beating yourself up about it. But there are some things that you eventually get to, will this matter in 10 years? Yes. Yes, this thing will still matter in a decade. Cool. That's the shit that is worth you focusing on and trying to figure out. But the majority of shit that we worry about on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't materially affect us in the grand scheme of things. And most of the shit we forget about. The shit you were worried about 3 weeks ago, like the majority of things, in a couple hours it was gone, or by the next day or next week it was gone. You don't even remember it anymore. But again, we act as if whatever we're currently afraid of is the only thing that exists in the world because we catastrophize it out. So doing these little thought experiments of trying to put it into perspective, because again, like, will this matter in a handful of days or weeks? Or, okay, if it does happen, how will I deal with it? You're putting all of this into perspective, and it helps you take a step back and be like, okay, even if it is a big deal, I can make it through it. I have a plan, or hey, this shit isn't going to matter later. So really, it isn't that important now. That helps filter out the majority of shit that we let get in our way.
Interesting. Very cool. I love that. And is this some of this information is stuff that you obviously learned as a clinical psychologist, but is it, and then you became executive coach? Is this stuff that you're integrating between the two worlds, or how does that work?
Yeah. So even as a clinical psychologist, I'm sort of an oddball in that modern psychology, specifically like cognitive behavioral therapy and its iterations as far as dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, like all the fucking acronyms and lettering and shit. Modern psychology is largely rooted in ancient philosophy. Okay. Specifically things like Stoicism, Buddhism, and a couple other, a handful of like Socratic questioning, shit like that. All like modern psychology really did was take the same shit and rebrand it and, throw on some studies and shit. That's really it. Like shit people figured out thousands of years ago. Now we're like, holy shit, what's really effective for anxiety? Deep breathing. But we're going to call it diaphragmatic breathing. Well, motherfucker, you talk to anybody who studies Buddhism or is taking a fucking yoga class, be like, oh yeah, deep belly breaths. That shit works, right? So what I did early on was I was like, well, fuck it. I'll just go to the source. I will just read Stoicism, or I will learn about Buddhism. That informed my approach a lot more than I would have understood if I had only taken my classes and only read the textbooks and the articles. And all that shit's important. Right? All this shit gives you context.
Right.
And especially from like a therapeutic perspective, like when you're dealing with people with like clinically significant like disorders and shit, you have to have that level of training. You can't just read some Stoicism and then treat people with addiction. Like that shit isn't going to fucking work, right? But practical philosophies, like, again, not all of it, but largely things like Stoicism, things like Buddhism, shit like that, that can get you very, very far because it is so practical and so easily applied. That's why so many entrepreneurs read Stoicism, because it's super fucking practical.
Right.
So I always go back to things like that. And because I did that, the way I approached situations, either with therapy, patients, or now with coaching clients, it is all from very much how can we learn to understand ourselves better and then change our behaviors to reflect the person we want to be. Right? Like that's because I had a supervisor early on in therapy, and he was like, look, man, at the end of the day, everything is cognitive behavioral, even if it isn't considered like formal CBT, because formal CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it can be a little rigid. There's a lot of just terms that get in the way of shit. And there are a lot of manuals, and some people they're way too rigid with how they approach it. But the supervisor, he's like, look, man, everything is cognitive behavioral in that everything is about either how we think or how we behave. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner all this therapy shit is going to make sense. So it doesn't matter if you take a Freudian perspective or a Jungian perspective or, this or that or whatever, because ultimately all of these people, all they're trying to do is help people change or understand how they think and how they behave. Fundamentally, that's what the fuck all this shit is about. Therapy, philosophy, sports, all this shit, right? Because even like, with sports, your coach is like, hey, behave differently.
Right.
Hey, think about this differently. That's all of it is. It's just all these different disciplines come about it from a different perspective. Because, the goals may be different. Our own experiences are different, right? Because again, you're not going to go to a wrestling coach for the same issues as a therapist or a social worker, right? But ultimately, what everybody's trying to do is be more intentional with how you think and how you behave. That's my perspective anyway.
No, I think that's brilliant, because I usually define mental health as how you think, feel, and act. And so I think that falls in line with exactly what you said. And based on all of your studyings of Stoicism, philosophy, psychology, and now coaching, how would you define that term, mental health?
Okay. So I was going to bring this up anyway. Here's the thing that I didn't realize about the therapy world until I got into coaching. And we can go later into like the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Therapy, specifically like becoming a clinical, psychologist or whatever, because there are psychologists, counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists. There are a bunch of people who can do therapy, different types of therapy. But we, meaning clinicians, define mental health as the absence of mental illness. Okay. I didn't realize how fucked that was until I got into coaching. Okay. Because fundamentally, the difference between therapy and coaching, and again, we go more in depth, but fundamentally, the difference is therapy is about bringing somebody from dysfunctioning to functioning. So that is the primary goal of most modern forms of therapy. Okay. Especially when you're talking about therapy that insurance in the American healthcare system pays for. Because, and I say that because insurance doesn't cover non-pathology. It doesn't cover it'll cover major depressive disorder, single episode mild, but it will not cover like burnout or some shit necessarily. Right. Or hey doc, I just want to kind of dig into my childhood. unless that's causing some clinically significant fucking symptoms, insurance won't give a shit. So they won't pay for it. So unless you pay out of pocket, fuck you, pretty much is what happens, right? So therapy is about bringing you from dysfunctioning to functioning. Coaching largely is about taking somebody who already functions pretty well and helping them optimize, flourish, whatever term you want to throw in there, right? I never realized that I didn't really know what mental health or mental wellness was. I only knew what it wasn't.
Mm.
So my goal as a therapist wasn't to help you become healthy. It was to help you no longer be ill. Right. So my job was to help you become what is called subclinical, meaning you no longer warrant the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So you may still be kind of sad or kind of, just humdrum gray days, but because you no longer warranted an official diagnosis, because your symptoms weren't bad enough, they didn't last long enough, or they didn't occur frequently enough, you no longer warrant the diagnosis. That was my goal. Like, not like my personal goal, that was my professional goal. Like, the function of my job was to help you get to baseline, to help you get to where your head is above water. After that, that largely is when psychotherapy ends. Of like, hey doc, I feel okay now. You may not feel super happy. You may not have optimized, your habits or your mindset, or, flesh everything out and, living the best life you possibly could, so much as you're no longer having panic attacks, or you can now walk around Walmart without, almost fainting because of anxiety of being around people. So you're no longer ill. That is how we defined health. We defined it as the absence of illness, not the presence of wellness. So fucked, such a fucked way to look at it. And I didn't realize that until I went into executive coaching.
Wow. So then what if I'm seeing a psychologist and I become, like you said, my head's above water?
Mm-hmm.
Are most psychologists then taught to that? Can they bring me up to a higher level if I continue to see them? I would imagine they are.
Okay. So yes and no. So when I became I went through both for like licensure reasons and some other shit. I am officially certified to coach, right? Like, I didn't just call myself a fucking coach. I went through a very specific program. All of the skills I had as a psychologist were already very transferable to coaching, as far as helping people develop insight, helping them kind of get off the fence of ambivalence and actually take action, all of the shit. So I was prepared to coach people. What I needed was the mental shift, again, away from this illness model to the wellness model, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of psychologists hypothetically are capable of helping you go beyond just surviving and actually thriving. The issue is, again, this is functional analysis. What is the function of a psychologist? Most psychologists, not all, and again, especially like with private practice, some people, they cash only clinics, they can see whoever they want, and they have a lot of leeway with that. The issue is, from like a professional standpoint, you can only practice in certain areas where that is a sustainable business model, right? So you have to be in higher income areas to actually run a business doing shit like that, right? So that's one issue, because again, insurance doesn't cover that kind of stuff. So yes, hypothetically you could, but a big issue, man, is the person who can help you overcome anxiety or depression may not necessarily be the person who can help you optimize as an athlete or optimize your business habits, for example, right? Because again, like, I got no business training throughout school. I even asked, like my department, like, hey, can we partner with like the College of Business? So they just like give us a couple just fucking entrepreneurship, just a fucking webinar or some shit. We got none of it. Okay.
Wow.
So most psychologists are not prepared to help an entrepreneur because they don't understand it. Dude, all the shit that I've learned since December 2020. Like I fully self-taught. Okay. So you can find one, but it would be pretty hard. Honestly, man, around about half the people I work with have both. They work with me as their coach, and then they have a therapist for other things. And most of the people I work with, I don't even know why the fuck they're in therapy, because that isn't what they see me for. And like for me specifically, man, like I maintain a therapy license, but I plan to never do therapy again. It's just some legal bullshit I got to fuck with, red tape, whatever. But because of that, I have to be very specific, and it's in my contract and everything that all my clients sign up. Like, look, even though I can legally do therapy, you are not my therapy client. We don't do therapy. If I, at my sole discretion, think that you have hit a point where you need it, you're going to go, because we're not going to be doing, we're going to call it coaching and it's actually therapy. Like, absolutely fucking not. Like, because a lot of coaches actually do therapy and they don't even know it. Like ADHD coaches are practicing therapy. Addiction coaches are practicing therapy. Anxiety coaches are practicing therapy, because by definition, you like ADHD, addiction, anxiety, these are diagnoses which requires you to go to therapy, right? That's a personal pet peeve of mine, is a lot of people are calling it coaching and they're actually practicing therapy without any therapy training. And they can cause a lot of fucking harm to people. But people, like regular people, don't know that. Like, oh, they're an addiction coach. No, like it's, unless they went through very specific training and they're like attached to an addiction recovery program, and they are actually a recovery coach, meaning like they are somebody who is in recovery themselves. They went through specific training. They work alongside a psychologist and a physician. Cool.
Right.
But just some random motherfucker with a website. Absolutely not. But coaching is unregulated. Right. So,
right.
And so this is part of why I maintain my license. I legally cannot call myself a clinical psychologist unless I have an active license. I can say I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, but I cannot say that I'm a clinical psychologist without an active license. It's some weird bureaucratic bullshit, right? But anybody can call themselves a coach. Anybody can call themselves any kind of coach. I can be a fucking sex coach. If like, there's no fucking rules, right? And that's part of the issue.
Yes.
Is that anybody can call themselves a life coach without any training. And I know some life coaches, they're solid people. They know what they're doing. 90% fucking don't. And there's really no way for you to be able to tell that just by looking. But I mean, there's a lot of shitty psychologists too. So like, gatekeeping is a real issue. But you're more likely to find a competent psychologist than Googling a life coach.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's why there seems to be all these different domains of psychology and coaching for the specific niche that they're trying to reach. Like sports psychology is big now. Mental performance coaches are big now, which is kind of, I think it's basically the same thing. And, life coaching is a big industry, and, therapy and stuff like that. But I was a personal trainer for a long time, and that industry is very similar to the life coaching industry, where anyone can be a personal trainer. Basically, I mean, you could take a certification, or you don't really have to. No one actually asks you if you have a certification. And it's not regulated. So I can go on Instagram and I can put, my prices on there. I can show you like one nice workout, and people will pay for that. But I'm not actually teaching them how to work out. I'm not actually optimizing their fitness. I can't give them nutritional advice because I have no nutritional background and all of these things.
But you can call yourself. Well, but that's what I'm saying, right? Like, so you can call yourself a nutritionist. You can't call yourself a dietitian, right? Dietitian is a protected term. Nutritionist isn't.
So or nutrition coach, or
yeah, you could throw them on some fucking bro diet and be like, I'm a nutrition coach. Fucking, grilled chicken and broccoli and white rice all day, every day.
Right.
Bro diet, right? You can, and people would pay for it.
Right.
Fuck, man, you can do so much harm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Like, it's like there's really good personal trainers, really good ones. I've been trained by them as an athlete, and there's some really good coaches. I've also worked with some really good coaches. And I work with really good therapists with my nonprofit. And all of these people do a really good job in their specific area, but they have integrity about what they're doing. And they're not just saying things to get cash. They're not just marketing it in this like social media age where you can market anything. If you've got some good marketing, you're going to make money. But there's got to be some internal integrity. You got to be just like, you know, working in truth, like also seeking love and truth, and like these things that you value. Like you talk about living an intentional life all the time, Corey. And I know that you talk about living through your values. And like that's what these people aren't doing. And that's why it gets a bad rap when these professions are unregulated, and then they get stomped on because there are people out there who are doing harm when they think that they're pretending to do good. And that's really, I think, at the core issue.
Yeah. And the other issue too, man, is like I know people who've done this. Like you can read like the top 10 psychology books and then be like, I'm a mindset coach. You can. And honestly, you could probably do pretty well if if you were good at conveying information and good at coming up with a sales page. You can. And a lot of people, and you can make a perfectly viable career for the rest of your life just by reading the top 10, whatever the fuck books and synthesizing it. But in my experience, people pay for nuance. And what I mean by that is, you know, fake gurus and snake oil salesmen are really good at making the world look black and white. Everybody else sucks. Mine is the secret technique. This is the one hack you need. This is the fuck all, whatever. But any true expert, and this is part of the issue that experts struggle with when they come against fake gurus. Experts understand that there is nuance, that the world isn't black and white. It is gray.
Right.
Now, the issue that experts struggle with is experts spend their entire career learning to be an expert, not learning to sell their expertise. Gurus spend most of their time learning to sell bullshit, right? And the better salesman tends to win,
right,
in the short term, right? Now, eventually you burn bridges, or you develop this super shitty audience or whatever. But that's a big issue, is people who are serious about improving themselves in any capacity. Those are the people who are willing to invest in somebody who understands nuance. And eventually, you reading those top 10 books and telling people to drink water and to wake up and to get 8 hours of sleep and to, time block, that's shit. Anybody, if you've been on Twitter for more than 10 minutes, you have seen those fucking posts. Totally solid advice. I do not disagree with it. You should get adequate sleep, diet, exercise, all that other shit, right? You should time block, you should batch, of course. But eventually, you're going to run across somebody who's like, yeah, I've done all that, and yet I'm not making the progress I need to make. That is a motherfucker who needs nuance, and you are not the motherfucker to give it, because all you did was read some shit, repackage it, vomit it right back out, and pretend you're an expert when you're fucking not. And that's when the harm comes in.
Right. Yeah, they can do a fine job when it's just like surface level advice.
Exactly.
But when it gets like to the real meat and bones of actually optimizing someone, or bringing them, like you said, from dysfunction to function, or you're working with a CEO who's built 10 companies like the person you were talking about, that person can't help them build the 11th company. They're barely struggling to build their own practice on this surface level stuff that you're talking about. And I think that
person doesn't have the patience to deal with somebody who is incompetent.
Exactly. And I think so. The universe tends to work itself out a little bit, I think, on those, but some people do get away with it their whole life. And, kudos to them. Maybe they're using the money to feed their family and live a great life and all those things. And cheers to that, but I think it does catch up to people if you're not moving in a way that's, truth seeking and living with integrity. But that's just the way I see it.
No, I agree. And the other thing to kind of touch on your point about, you sort of accruing, this network of people who are, they have integrity and all this other stuff. A good question to ask people to just kind of vet them isn't to ask them what they're good at or what they know about, but ask them what they're not good at. And what I mean by that is, are people aware of the edges of their competence or not? Because somebody who tells you they can do everything is just full of shit.
Exactly.
Right. So like, and again, I am not the best coach in the world. I don't pretend to be. I know a decent bit of shit, right? Like there are very few executive coaches who are also like doctoral level psychologists, right? I am not for everybody, right? Both is just personality, because obviously I cuss a lot and just, I'm covered in fucking tattoos and shit. Like if y'all look at my website, like I am a pretty low key guy. However,
well, the top of your website picture, that picture is really nice. So
dude, that's me. That is not some fucking LinkedIn headshot. Like, and I specifically, like it was a friend who did my headshot shows like this. I specifically want it to not look like some LinkedIn shit. Like this is me in fucking dark jeans, boots, black t-shirt, my fucking tattoo showing. Like that is me.
It's a great picture. Authentic, authentic.
Exactly.
When people sign up for your course, they know that they're getting you and they know that you're going to present you to them.
Yeah, there's no bullshit. I don't have time for bullshit in my life. But the thing is, man, like, so like with you and like the sports stuff. So if somebody were to come to me and be like, hey, Corey, can you do this group with like team sports athletes to help them with sports psychology? Because all the time I have people like, hey man, like I'm sure you'd be great at sports psychology because you're a psychologist and you do combat sports. I'm like, look, that isn't my competency. Like I am not good at that. Like I've helped like MMA fighters one-on-one with like some mindset shifts and some other ways of like kicking into like that combatant mode when they need to. And we can go into that at some point if you want. But absolutely, for me to talk to like a football team, I don't understand football. Like my dad tried to get me into it. Like I don't understand any ball sport, football, baseball. My girlfriend tries to get me into hockey. I don't fucking understand any of it. So I am not the person to go and talk to a sports ball team about sports balling. I'm fucking not, right? I know that. So when you were trying to vet people, a simple question like, oh, I can do everything. You fucking can. You're full of shit.
Exactly. Yeah. Because experts know what they're experts at
and what they're not. Exactly.
Like I played baseball for a long time. I coach a baseball team now. So when people ask me to do baseball related things, yes, that is where like one of three things that I know a lot about,
Exactly.
But if you ask me to coach a tennis player, I don't know. I know that the rotational skills are a bit similar. I know the lateral movement is a bit similar. But I've never played a serious game of tennis, so I can't train that person to be an elite level performer. I can maybe if I have a son and he wants to play tennis, absolutely. But if he wants to get good, he's getting a coach because that guy knows what he's doing. And I'm very, very happy to say I don't know that, but I can try and figure it out, or I can ask someone who absolutely does know that answer, and I will get back to you. And I think that's an important skill to develop, especially when you're in this kind of field of trying to be a service to people, because you're doing them a disservice by just straight up lying to them.
Exactly. And I think when you're trying to be effective at whatever it is, whether it's coaching or a company or your job or whatever, I'm a huge fan of knowing and staying in your lane. And I don't mean like saying, fuck everybody else, that isn't my job. I mean, getting hyper clear on what you are most valuable doing. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's even something like I do like with some of like my clients of like, look, eventually you become the bottleneck for your company, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you have a team, it doesn't matter. Eventually you as the creator, the owner, whatever, you become the bottleneck. And it is important to learn to recognize where you're the bottleneck and then figure out how to remove yourself as a bottleneck. And one simple way is, one question I ask him is like, where are you most valuable to your company? Like the top 1 to 3, maybe 5 things you are most like, what is most worth your time for you to spend doing for your company? What is all the other shit that somebody else could do, either as good or marginally within that than you? All that shit, outsource it, right? Like, delegate it, automate it, that Eisenhower matrix shit of like do, delegate, eliminate, whatever. Like offload as much of that shit as possible, so that one, you're moving yourself as a bottleneck, but two, now you are staying in your lane where you are most valuable to your company, to your goals. Because when you're trying to do everything, when you're trying to keep control of everything, you eventually bottleneck growth for yourself, for your company, for your team, for whatever. You have to know what you are most uniquely qualified to do and focus on that. Because that way, if everybody does that, everybody fires on all cylinders, and you can grow exponentially.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that basically is the definition of elite performers.
Exactly.
In any sort of domain. And that leads me to kind of my next question. We kind of briefly touched on sports, but there's a heavy discussion now about sports and mental health and the intersection of that. And then past the mental health discussion, there's like the mental skills, the mental wellness, the mental performance discussion. And I know you work with elite performers, whether business, sport, MMA fighters you mentioned. Do you think it's possible, and I think it is, to build an elite performer in any sort of domain while maintaining like high mental well-being? And right before we popped on, I saw a tweet that you put out about work-life balance and how you want to integrate that. And I think about that as like a harmonious passion. And I think those two kind of fall in line. So give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So for context, for listeners, I talked about, kind of stop thinking about it as work-life balance and start thinking about it more as work-life integration, right? So instead of trying to see it as like two opposites, how can you make it whole? Like, how can you build a whole life where the work you do complements the life you live, rather than clocking in and clocking out, right? Like, that's a thing that fucks a lot of people. And that's especially important for like athletes, right? Because like, if you are trying to be an elite level athlete, that's what the fuck you do. Everything you eat, the way you train, the people you hang out with, the shit you consume in any capacity, generally all serves the function to make you a better athlete. Now, yes, some people, they have like training camps and then they just kind of fuck off in between training camps. Those people also don't tend to do very well overall. And there's this, I'll butcher the quote, but it is by George St. Pierre, who's super famous MMA fighter. And one of his quotes is essentially, I'm not a fighter. A fighter trains for a specific fight. He was like, I am a martial artist, meaning everything I do serves the function of being a whole, well-rounded person. Right. And again, you can Google the full quote, but I love that because he's like, look, I don't just train for a fight. This is what I do all day, every day. So I don't do this like, this boom and bust cycle of I train super hard for like 6 weeks or 2 months, and then I fuck off for a couple months between fights. He's like, I am eating clean all the time. I am staying in shape and training every day. That is my life. So he had integrated all of that. So now, even though he's retired and he may not train as hard or as frequently necessarily, but the dude still eats really clean, trains pretty much every day, because that is just his life. Like, that is just what he does.
Right.
Right. And I think it's just like, think about like any habit, right? It is much easier to integrate a habit into your day-to-day life rather than in what you kind of already do, rather than try to do like some New Year's resolution bullshit, right? Like, very few people ever like actually maintain their New Year's resolution more than like 2 or 3 weeks, because they tend to try to make this big, massive change that takes their entire routine at a hard left, right? Versus trying to make little changes, and then you kind of build your life around it. As far as athletes and mental health, yes, obviously you can have both, right? I'm not a fan of like this whole thing of you have to be miserable to be a top performer. Because like, what's the point? Right? Like, you can't take your trophies with you when you die. Your friends and family don't give a shit about how many awards you have, right? What's the point if you hate the journey, right? Or if all of that journey comes at the cost of something you actually care a lot about? Because any worthwhile endeavor requires a sacrifice, Okay. So the point is to be intentional with the sacrifices you make. Okay. And what I mean by that is everything, there's a trade-off, right? So when you decide to sit on the couch and binge watch something and eat Cheetos all evening, instead of going and training, well, that is a sacrifice you have unintentionally made, right?
Mm.
Versus saying, okay, instead of going out and getting shit faced 3 nights a week, I'm going to take, 2 or 3, I'm going to take those nights and I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn a new hobby. I'm going to read some cool books, listen to some awesome podcasts. I'm going to do something else that in the long term will lead to a better life or a better version of myself. Well, that is an intentional sacrifice because you're saying I am willing to sacrifice bullshit for this better outcome. So as an athlete, there are times when you aren't going to be able to go out and get pizza with the guys, right? Because you have a fight coming up. That is a sacrifice. Like you can't do that, right? And that's fine if the sacrifice is worth it in the end.
Right.
Because like I know people who they make all those sacrifices and then they end up just fucking miserable because like, fuck, man, it wasn't worth it. I didn't get to see, my baby girl growing up because I was always training her. I was always doing X, Y, or Z. And like, yeah, I got this, this belt, or yeah, I got this money, but I missed the first 6 years of her life that I will never get back. Right. So again, it isn't a good or bad thing. It is a matter of what sacrifices are worth it to you in the long run. Right. Between that and learning to integrate your training, your life, in your work, that I think is the path to balancing a professional career in mental health or mental wellness, right? So like one of the guys, Chewy. So for jiu-jitsu guys, like the jiu-jitsu Facebook channel or YouTube channel, I think it's up to like 300K followers or something. So Chewy, I train at Chewy's gym right now, Derby City MMA. And Chewy talks about this as far as like, Chewy trains jujitsu probably twice a day, majority of the week. And he lifts and like he runs a fucking gym, right? Like he teaches and spars and he lifts. And then he's got the podcast and his newsletters. He does a ton of shit, right? And Chewy is a huge proponent of like work-life balance. He was like, don't talk to me about that. He was like, I don't have it. I do not have a balance between my work and my life. Like I do it like it is all together. He was like, there's some nights where, I get home late and that's just kind of part of it. He was like, I do what I love. I do not have work-life balance. Mm-hmm. Right. So like, and now like his fiance, because they're engaged now, Jess, like, that's the thing, like Chew's got to talk to people about, like, if he's dating, of like, look, if you're going to expect, me to like clock out at 5 o'clock and come home and fuck off on the couch, he's like, that isn't me. Like, this is what I do. Like, I train, I teach, I do this, I do that. Right. And I think that's more sustainable because like that's your life. That is what you do. And you have found a way to integrate everything together rather than seeing it as, okay, now I got to go work. Okay, now I can relax. Right. Because like humans are lazy. Like we gravitate toward what feels good and what takes the least amount of effort. So mentally, when you make this dichotomy of work and life, either or, it makes work just seem harder. So now we're not doing that, the hard shit because we enjoy the process. We're doing it just as like a chore so that we can get back and enjoy life. Right. Versus integrating them and like, how can I be a well-rounded athlete? How can I build this life around what I truly give a shit about? That to me is a much more sustainable long-term thing. Because some of the best guys I know, as far as like the best like martial artists I know, that's what they do. Right. Like, I mean, yeah, they don't have the same amount of time to fuck around in the evenings, but the partners that they attract, like their girlfriends, a lot of the people I know are dudes. I know a couple women who do that lifestyle, but like, you know, like the women they end up finding get it. They're supportive, right? The friends that they make are on the same journey or a similar journey. So everybody's super supportive.
Right.
Right. And I think that the guys who have found that, again, not that balance, but that integration, I think they are in a much better headspace the majority of the time versus the guys I know who they train, you know, in fight camp, they're super, you know, they're super gung ho. And then you don't see them for a couple of weeks because they're fucking off. Those guys do, like, those guys are trying to see it as a balancing act rather than how do I integrate everything together in a cohesive whole. The balancing people tend to struggle way more than integration people.
I'm really glad I saw that tweet right before we hopped on. It's perfect timing for that. But yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. Like thinking about me as a college athlete, like that's what we're trying to do, because, you know, I'm trying to have a social life. I'm trying to do my full-time job as a baseball player, and I'm trying to be a full-time student. There's no real balance, because then it would be like, it doesn't work. Viewing it like that doesn't work. And so trying to, again, integrate all three of those things. And maybe some days I'm giving more time to this, or some days I'm deciding to do this over this, but it's all part of this one like harmonious experience. And so, yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. Brilliant.
Well, and like, even, you know, like with me in entrepreneurship, right? Like, and again, I am not some like super big fancy, like 20, 30, $100 million entrepreneur type people, right? Like I'm still grinding it out. But like my girlfriend, she gets it. She's like, look, some days you're not going to come out of your office until 7 o'clock. Like
Right.
she's not happy about it, but she supports it. Right. Or like, you know, sometimes we'll talk about friends and be like, yeah, man, like I played WoW all weekend. I'm like, dude, that's fucking great for you. Like I got no problems with you fucking off of video games. I was like, I love video games. I miss playing them, but I have a finite amount of time every day. And again, like I'm not demonizing video games. There's nothing wrong with video games. But for me personally, every time, like the majority of times, like after I would, you know, binge, 8 hours playing a video game, I'm like, fuck, man, like I could have read a book. Or fuck, I could have worked on, you know, my brand, or I could have come up with a new like digital product idea or some other kind of thing, to where I'm just like, look, man, like I only have so much time in a day, so much energy, mental bandwidth. I would rather spend that busting it out on my business, and then going and hanging out with my girlfriend, going and training jujitsu, going and doing something else, you know, and maybe watching a little bit of TV in the evening, versus spending all Saturday fucking off on video games. And I have people all the time like, hey man, can you come play with us? Like, dude, I'd fucking love to, but I don't love to enough to do it, because I have 8 other priorities that outrank that.
Right.
Right. So I'm not saying I want to, but I got shit that is just more important to me. Right. And that's the thing, is like this, there's this integration of like, you know, if I was trying to balance it, then I would, you know, work hard and then I would fuck off on the weekends. But for me, I'm like, man, I'm in my office Sunday through Saturday. Like I don't take days off because I don't want to. Because even like when I try to take a day off, all I'm thinking about my business, or I'm thinking about an article I can write, or like my girlfriend and I we'll take a road trip sometimes. And on the road trip, like I'm like, obviously like I'm talking to her and, you know, we're having quality time, but I'll have an idea and I'm like, pause, I need to write this shit down. Because this is a great article idea, or, oh, I need to put this in an article. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to contact somebody about this idea. Like that is how my brain works, because I see it as an integration. And again, I'm not an authority on this. Throw all this shit out the window, right? You got to find out what the fuck works for you. But for me, I much prefer this version of my life than when I had a therapy job and I worked, you know, the 8:30 to 4:30 and then turned off, and then fucked around the weekends or in the evenings. That isn't for me. I would much rather go through 24/7 living a life that I love, rather than seeing this as I work this job that I don't really care about, and then I enjoy myself on the weekends, the evenings, the occasional 2-week vacation, and then really shooting to retire at 65. That isn't the life for me.
And you started this entrepreneurial journey in December of 2020, you said?
Correct.
And now we're here it's today, the day we're recording is April 13th, 2022. So what have you learned about yourself, about building a brand, and eventually the decision to put out a course called Intentional Life Design?
That it's way fucking harder than you anticipate, regardless of how hard you anticipate it to be.
It's really hard.
So my kind of journey. So the reason I kind of dove into entrepreneurship in December 2020 was I had negotiated a remote therapy job. And then 2 months into that new contract, I got fired because they were like, hey, we're not supporting telehealth anymore. So like no more remote jobs. Well, I was licensed in West Virginia, and the way therapy licenses work, I can be anywhere in the world, but you as my patient have to physically be in the state I'm licensed in during the call. You don't have to live there. You just have to have your 2 feet on that piece of fucking dirt for that 30 to 45-minute call. So I'm licensed in West Virginia, living in Kentucky. I can't find another remote job out of West Virginia. I'm not willing to move back because we just moved. And in order for me to get licensed in Kentucky would have been like 4 months and hundreds of dollars. It just because of how fucked up the licensure process is. It's totally fucking broken. So it's like, fuck, I have like 3 paychecks worth of runway, nothing in my savings, $200,000 in fucking loans, like student loans and shit, because getting a doctorate's expensive as fuck. I was like, I got to figure something out. And I had a lot of apprehensions around coaching, just internalized stigma, because, all through grad school, we're like, fuck life coaches. We're better than them, right? Like that was just part of it. But I read this article by the American Psychological Association, and they were like, look, coaching is an unregulated field, which is why psychologists and other people with mental health backgrounds should actually join the discipline to elevate the quality. I was like, oh, it's a really interesting take. One of the guys quoted in it, his name's Dr. Jeffrey Auerbach. He runs the College of Executive Coaching. So found his name, found that, and I ended up going through their program, and it was really, really good. So got the certification, started offering coaching for free, went really heavy, went hard and heavy on my website, writing and shit. And my writing's evolved from like mental health toward like more businessy shit. And slowly got paying clients, slowly just kind of started building it. And it's kind of where I'm at now. But everything, man, is just kind of eat shit and grind. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like there's no hacks. There's no like, my dad gave me a $1 million loan or a small $1 million, whatever the fuck that is. Like, dude, like all the shit that I have built not by myself, in that I've met a lot of really fucking cool people who, there are some people, man, like it isn't even that they help me out so much as they're entrepreneurs. So anytime I start to question my ability to be an entrepreneur, I just talk to them. Even if they don't give me advice, it's just like, I know somebody who makes, $20,000 a month off of one of their 3 companies. I know somebody who built an email list of, 50,000 people. I know somebody with this. I know somebody who makes, 10, 15 million a year. Right. Just being able to talk to those people like, okay, I'm good. I'm struggling. I'm grinding. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but I know people who prove the model.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And coming at that from like, again, just as like a poor kid from rural Appalachia, right? Like on food stamps and getting like church donation turkeys for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Like I didn't know anybody, right? Like all of this shit, like I've been able to meet super fucking cool people through the internet, even just like, me and you, like we met each other through fucking Twitter. Like it's fucking awesome.
Super right? Cool. I love it.
That's what I'm saying. And so like with me and like this course, the course is basically just like all the shit I do with one-on-one coaching, just like all the strategies and frameworks, but just put into a curriculum with like a community attached to it. Because for me, like I took a lot of cohort-based courses or CBCs after I got fired. I took CBC. So I took a CBC on like how to write online, how to do YouTube, how to create a course, how to do this, how to do that. And the content in the courses was really good. But the biggest thing the biggest benefit I got from all those courses was the people that I met, was a community. It wasn't the content, it was the community. So when I decided to like, build my own, I was like, well, fuck, like I could just make this a self-paced course, charge, $200 for it and just let it ride. I was like, but self-paced courses have a super low completion rate because people buy them, but they just don't fucking finish them.
Yeah.
And there's no community attached. I was like, my whole thing is I just want to like give people all these fucking tools, but then like help them be part of a community of other people who can help them network, brainstorm, just support each other. Like that's the real benefit for me with all the other courses I've taken. So that's why I decided to go that route with, my own. But we'll see how it goes.
How is it going so far? Has it been well received?
Yeah. So I'm currently just doing, I don't know, again, like when this will come out, but even if the course is already like officially launched, there will be subsequent cohorts people can go to if they want. So my current strategy is I pre-sale the course. And then assuming the course is validated, meaning it hits a certain number of people, then I actually build it. Right. And the struggle that a lot of people early on in entrepreneurship get into is they think the whole field of dreams thing, if I build it, they will come. No, that isn't how it really works most of the time, unless you have a fuck ton of money to throw at ad spend.
Yeah.
No. Right. Some of the best entrepreneurs I personally know, they do the opposite. Like, look, if they come, I will build it. Meaning they throw up a landing page or they put out some offer. And then if enough people buy it, then they're like, oh, okay. I know people want it. People have opened their wallets. It isn't that people are just saying, oh, this is a really good idea. Like, don't fucking listen to anybody who tells you that thing is a good idea if they are not willing to open their wallet and actually purchase it. Right. Skin in the game type shit. So once enough people open their wallets, that's when, a lot of the people I know, those are like, okay, now I'm going to build it. I know there's demand. I know people are already, they've locked in their spot. They've given me money. Now I'm going to build the thing. And that's just one of those things, like you don't learn unless like, entrepreneurs really, or you read a lot about it. Like that's like that just approach kind of blew my mind personally. I'm like, oh shit. Like you don't have to have it fully fleshed out before you like show it to the world. You can just be like, hey, I'm thinking about making this thing. Do you want in? So, and again, for me, man, building it isn't a big deal because I already know everything's going to be in the course.
Right.
All it is just putting it into like, oh, week 1, we talk about this. Week 3, we talk about that. Like all the shit I know works. All the shit I know is super helpful because I've been doing it for the last 16 months with, entrepreneurs, founders, solopreneurs, online creators, whatever.
Right. Yeah. You've been in the trenches with it for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So now you can give it to a mass audience, and that's awesome. Besides your course, and obviously your Twitter content is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. It's concise. It's clear. It's easy to understand. And then there's an easier place to go get more information where I think you go more in depth, which is your newsletter, which I also subscribe to. How's the newsletter coming, and where can people subscribe to that?
Yeah. So, and we can put up the link in the description of this, whatever, but
yeah, I definitely will.
So my name across all of the internet is Corey Wilks, PsyD, because my doctorate is a PsyD. So it would just be CoreyWilksPsyD.com. And like that takes you to the homepage. You can look through shit. And then there's a newsletter sign up right there. That's the easiest way to make sure you don't miss out on shit. You can also follow me on Twitter, which is again, Corey Wilks PsyD. The main difference between a PsyD and a PhD is just a PhD is more research heavy and not a lot of actual practice. A PsyD is the opposite. A PsyD, we did a lot of like hands-on like therapy and just really practical work. And then we did some research. That's the main difference. Like it's the same level. It's just a PsyD is like a newer degree because a lot of people were like, fuck man, like I really want to do a bunch of therapy, but I didn't actually learn to do therapy a whole lot in grad school, getting my PhD. Like it'd be super cool if we had a degree that was mostly just doing therapy.
And then they built that. It makes sense.
Correct. It's about maybe a 20-year degree. Like it's like around 20 years old overall, maybe a little bit more at this point.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
It's a relatively new degree, but
Yeah.
it's very practical, very applied.
Amazing. Well, Corey, I have one more question for you, if you're cool with that.
Oh, dude, I got time. You're good.
Okay. I want to know what you do every day, what your specific go-to tools are for maintaining your mental wellness.
One, jujitsu.
Oh yeah.
And lifting. I do like some strength training. I've been doing more Olympic lifting, which I super suck at. Like,
Do you like Olympic lifting? It's very, very hard.
So I am not an athletic person. I am not coordinated. Man, I did football for like literally a day. Like in high school, like I threw up the first day, my ankles swelled, and I said, fuck it, I'm done. I did virtually no sports growing up. I did baseball when I was like, 8 or 9, but I was like, where does the ball not go? Okay, I'll be like the right outfielder or whatever the fuck, because everybody's right-handed, so it goes to the other side. Like that was
amazing.
Me.
Amazing.
Right? Like when I was in band, I was like, hey, I'm going to do the snare drum. And then when that got too hard, I was like, I'm gonna do the bass drum. When I got too hard, I'm like, I'm gonna play the fucking triangle. And the music teacher was like, we don't have triangle in any of the parts. I'm like, cool, fuck it, that's me. I'll be the triangle guy. Right? Like I wasn't the all-star anything. So Olympic lifting is I like it and hate it at the same time.
Yep.
I like how efficient it is. I hate how much I suck at it. Like snatches kick my ass. My body's not core. Like cleans are a little bit easier. Like I don't do power anything because like my knees are fucked. So like I can't like dip. So I'll do like muscle cleans and muscle snatches. But snatches just, cleans are a lot easier for me, but snatches just kick my ass. So I lift, I do jujitsu. That's super helpful. Because man, like the biggest thing, especially when you do something that it's hard to mentally turn off, because like I'm always thinking about an article or a video I can do or a product, some kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to just be like, okay, I'm done for the day. Right. Or like when something super stressful is going on, like, because like entrepreneurial stress is a different kind of stress. Cause it's just like, well, fuck, if this doesn't work out, I can't pay the bills. Right. Like there's a lot riding on it. So having something that forces your brain to turn off is incredibly helpful. For me, that is jujitsu. Because even like when I'm lifting, I can still like ruminate or, just think about this thing that is irritating me, because lifting doesn't take a whole lot of like mental like effort for me. So I can be like pissy and lift. I can't with jujitsu because there's another adult human being actively trying to strangle me unconscious. My brain has to dedicate all of its fucking resources to preventing that from happening. So there is like just this calm that I get that I only really get from jujitsu, like after a really hard training session. Cause like some days, man, like, I'm sure you go through this too. Like some days you're like, look, I know I'm just going to have a shit performance today. I feel off. I feel like shit. I just need to get my ass beat for 2 hours. And then you know what? I'll feel better. It's just like for the audience, like if you've never done jiu-jitsu, like it sounds like super like masochistic or something, but like, man, it fucking helps. Like
you really just have to get there on those days. You just have to get there.
Exactly. And then like just shit changes. Like it's so cathartic. So that for me, man, it helps a lot. Otherwise, like I talked about with Stoicism and Buddhism, those help me just on a daily basis. Just like, what's within my control, what is outside my control. How can I learn to kind of sort of shift my attention away from all the shit that I can't control and really double down my efforts on the few things that I can control. That just kind of helps you stay in a more like empowered mindset. Because like, out of 100 things, if 97 of them are out of your control, but 3 are within your control, you will feel so much better if you focus on those 3 instead of the 97. Because the 97, it doesn't matter how much you try to think about or how hard you fucking work, it's out of your control. So of all those things, what are the few that you can control and how can you focus on those more? So I do a lot of shit like that. The Buddhism is just, being, aware of your thoughts. How can you, remain calm or be aware when you're starting to get agitated or, holding tension in your muscles and shit, just mindfulness type shit. Those are the big things I do.
Amazing. Are you someone who likes to journal? Because I know you write articles and you write online a lot, but do you journal for like yourself?
So I am inconsistent with journaling. So I took a year and I journal like every day. I bought the Daily Stoic, which I highly recommend. It's a super good like intro book to Stoicism. But the Daily Stoic has a companion like Daily Stoic journal. So I took a year and like every day, because the Daily Stoic is just like a day-to-day thing. So like every day there's like a quote and like a modern like application of that quote. So you just read one page a day. Super, super approachable. I took a year and I did that. Like I read the prompts, I journaled about them, I journaled about my day, my thought process, whatever. And then I I kind of got out of the habit after I almost died. Well, depending if you want to go down that route. So last January, I almost died. So fired in December, almost died in January, right? Like
Wow.
it was a rough winter. Long story short, I had a bruise from jujitsu that I thought was a hairline fracture. Because again, jujitsu, like you're always banged up, you're always hurt, sore, whatever. And I had a bruise on my shin. And I got bruises on my shins all the time back then because I did a little like shin on shin stuff. And I was like, oh, it's just a hairline fracture. I'll just walk it off. I'll give it a couple of days and it'll be, whatever. Because jujitsu guys are fucking weird. Athletes are fucking weird. And it got super bad. So we ended up going to the hospital and they're like, hey, this isn't a bruise. It is basically like a super bad infection. Technically, it was a hematoma with that had turned into an abscess and cellulitis. Just a really like an infected bruise, pretty much, that was spreading throughout my entire leg. And they're like, look, if it has gotten into your blood or your bones, you could die. So they're like, we have to immediately transfer you and prep you for surgery while we're waiting for the labs to come back. Well, this is peak COVID. So like beds are full, couldn't fucking get transferred. I sat in this waiting little tiny room for like 12 hours on an IV drip of antibiotics that I wasn't responding to, with HGTV, like fucking House Hunters and shit, playing for 12 hours. The TV was broken. You couldn't turn it off and you couldn't change the channel.
Oh my God.
Like it was like extra hellish because I fucking hate HGTV. And now I hate it even more. But they finally transferred me, like I said, after about 12 hours, and labs still hadn't come back yet. So I remember laying in that fucking hospital bed by myself, couldn't have visitors. So I was all alone except for like the occasional nurse to come in and check vitals and like this beeping machine. And I sat there and I was like, I could die tomorrow. What if this had been my last week alive? Right? Because like, like I'm 33 right now. Like, when you're younger, you don't think about dying as much. And again, from Stoicism, I had thought about memento mori, like, remember
Right.
you will die, using your mortality as a motivator to live fully, all that other shit. My whole right sleeve is dedicated to memento mori, right? I thought I understood it. But in that moment, I was like, fuck, man, this could have already been my last week alive. So I was like, am I satisfied with how I spent what could have been my last 7 days? And that week, my answer was yes. I was like, I trained, I spent time with loved ones. I was starting coaching and writing. I was like, I don't want to go out, but if I do, I'm satisfied with what may have been my last week. Obviously I survived. But for me, that is a much more effective thought experiment than saying, well, what if you had 30 days to live? What if you had a week to live? Because if you know what's going to happen, you can go out with a bang. Like you can go skydiving, you can blow all your money, you can go to fucking Vegas, whatever. That to me isn't nearly as helpful versus saying, what if you've already done it? You can't go back, you can't change, you can only look in retrospect. Are you satisfied? And I use that with a lot of my clients. I've kind of written about it before. And for me, it's just, it puts everything into perspective, because you immediately see, you can immediately pinpoint all the bullshit that you've let into your life, you've let into your schedule, the things that you didn't have to do, but you allowed into your life. Because we all have obligations and responsibilities, but there are some things that you don't have to do, that you are continuing to allow in. You immediately see all the things that you wish you would have done differently. Well, cool. Assuming this isn't your last week alive, fucking do that now. Right. Like, and so for me, like every week, like that is, so I don't necessarily like journal it out, but that is like a check-in I do of like, hey, motherfucker, did you call all the people you care about? Did you do work that mattered? Like, and like, that is, I talk about intentional life design. Like that is the thing for me, man, is, we all die. That's inevitable. We don't know when, we don't know how necessarily, but that is like an undeniable truth. The issue is most people pretend like it won't happen, or they avoid thinking about it. And then they live like they're going to be fucking immortal. And so then they let all this bullshit into their lives. They chase the wrong things. They let fear stop them. They let, oh, well, what will critics say? What will my friends and family think? Well, what if I fail? What if this? Fuck it. You're going to die one day. What do you want to be able to lay on your deathbed and look back on and be proud you fucking did, and be satisfied that you built a life that is worth living? You built a legacy that matters, right? Like, what the fuck did you do that was worth doing, that you would do again? Right? Because like there's this, and if you have looked at anything with my website, you've probably seen like the Cornell study statistic I throw out of like, there's Cornell, they found that 76% of people die with the exact same regret. Like they lie on their deathbeds regretting the fact that they lived in mediocrity. They die regretting not having lived a more meaningful life, specifically because they let shit like fear, or they chase the wrong things because they are like, well, this is what I thought I was supposed to want because this is what my family told me is good, or this is what society told me I'm supposed to want. I'm supposed to want fancy cars and this kind of salary or this kind of house. I didn't actually want to do that. I wanted to do this thing over here, but I spent 40 years of my working life going this other direction, right? Because again, like that whole save, slave, retire mindset of, you graduate high school, you become an adult, you pick a job you fucking hate, you try to enjoy the evenings and weekends, and then you're really just trying to get to 65 so you can retire. Well, if the average life expectancy is like 80 years, you're going to give up like 45 fucking years of your life to maybe enjoy the last 15.
Yeah.
That assumes you and the people you care about are fucking there with you. A lot of them won't be. I would much rather, man, and that's part of my mission, is to help as many people as I can, like avoid joining that 76%, right? Is like, you can do work that matters right the fuck now. But fear, limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging behaviors, and all this other bullshit is getting in your way. How can we help you overcome it so that you can do work that matters, so that you can, build a fulfilling life? And I know fulfilling is like a loaded word, like self-actualization and shit, because, all the fake gurus have fucked it up, right? Insert whatever the fuck term you want to put for fulfillment, right? That is what I ultimately want to help people do. So everything, whether it is, tweeting, writing, podcasts, with awesome people like you, like the course, whatever the fuck it is, that is everything that I do professionally is geared toward helping other people be more intentional with how they live, work, and career, so they can do fulfilling shit, build a fulfilling business, build a fulfilling life, whatever the fuck, just so you can get the most out of the life that you get. That is why I do what I do.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to add to that. I think that's beautiful. I think, yeah, I mean, from my vantage point, it seems like you're definitely embodying that and being about that, every single day. And I think that's why your journey so far has been successful. And, I wish for more success for you and all the people that you're going to serve and help. And so thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me about this amazing stuff.
Oh, dude, no problem. Like, and I'm down to come on again in the future if you want me to.
I do.
And I'm especially down, like, if you want to like try to like get questions from the audience or just come up with other shit, like I'm down to help as much as I can as well.
Sweet. Wow. Yeah. So I do, I guess I can talk to you this after I'll ask you this question once we stop recording.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. Any last minute comments, questions, concerns, funny stories, anecdotes that you want to share?
Not for right now for today. That'll have to be for round 2, I guess.
Okay. Amazing. Well, this was episode 95 of Jaxon Talks, everybody. Corey, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who tuned in, whether you watched, viewed, listened, subscribe to the YouTube channel, rate, Spotify, Apple, and I'll see you next Tuesday. That's when we start with a new episode of Jaxon Talks, everybody. Cheers, and much love.